Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is measure my shortest scrap piece, which is 19.5 inches. Then I'm going to take all my scraps to the miter saw and cut them all to the same length. I'll tell you why that's important when we get to the planer. For this build, I'll be using pre-milled hard maple veneers that I picked up at Rockler. If I can find a link to some, I'll put them in the description below. Otherwise, you could just go to Rockler and get some. Okay, now I've got all my pieces cut to length. Now I'm going to take my most narrow piece to the table saw and set my fence and cut the rest of my scraps to the same width. That way when I glue them into panels, the panels are the same thickness. So right here I'm using one of my scrap pieces that I'm about to glue together as a guide to cut the veneers to the same thickness. Each time I do this, I use a fresh razor blade. For each glue up, you need one piece of veneer to go in between each piece of wood. Now I'm taking all my scraps, I'm rotating them 90 degrees, and then I'm gluing them all back together. We're going to do this type of glue up, we're going to do it 3 times. And I'm doing it in sections right here because all the scraps won't fit on my clamps in this laying down orientation. And I'm using a paint roller to spread the glue because it's faster and it helps speed up the glue up. So these veneer pieces are really flimsy, as you'll see right here. So to keep them from flopping all over the place, I'll just start stacking them on top of these pieces on the left, as I'm doing right here. And then when I have more room, I'm going to start stacking 2 of them on top of there at a time. And that'll help everything go a little bit quicker also. Okay, you'll see right here I start stacking 2 up there at a time. Okay, now I'm finishing up that first section, and now I'm going to start rotating the pieces for the next section. This panel, I'm going to glue it up in 3 sections. Okay, so now it's the next day, and I have 3 panels. Each of them are around 12 inches wide. Whenever you glue these up, always put the widest or most undesirable piece on the outside because part of that will end up becoming waste. Here's my shop dog, Baxter, and my shop baby. Alright, so this is my weapon of choice for removing the glue. After I scrape off some of the glue, I run all 3 panels through the planer on both sides. Once the boards are smooth like this, I like to take one more really light pass and take off only like a millimeter or 2. I think that gives me a cleaner finish and gets rid of any snipe I might have. This is one of the first patterns that I built, and this is why in the beginning of the video I cut all my scraps to length. When you have a flimsy piece at the end, it bounces off the front roller of your planer and can damage your planer blades. So that's why I cut everything to length. Okay, next I set my bandsaw blade to 1 inch. And I start cutting from this side of the panel, and then this wide piece is going to wind up being my offcut or my waste piece. That's why I was saying earlier in the video to always put your most undesirable piece on the outside of your panels. Now I'm going to cut all 3 panels into 1 inch strips. Okay, I just want to take a second to say thank you to the woodworker who inspired me to make these patterns. His name is David Haas Howard on the left side. I'll put a link to his Instagram in the description of the video. Okay, and now I'm just going to continue cutting all 3 panels into 1-inch strips. Okay, so right here I'm rearranging the pieces so the pattern appears random and I don't have clumps of the same type of wood right next to each other. I do this before each of these glue ups in this build. Now I'm going to use one of these 1-inch wide scrap pieces that I'm about to glue up as a guide to cut all my veneers. Okay, so same thing as the last glue up. We're just going to rotate all of our scrap pieces 90 degrees and then glue them back together. And it's also going to be the same thing on the next glue up, so I'm going to kind of skip through these next 2 glue ups. Okay, so the next day, plane all 3 of your panels and then bring them to the bandsaw, cut them into 3/4 inch strips. Before I made this video, I did some Instagram tutorials, and here's some of the boards that my followers from Instagram made. I'll put a link to my Instagram in the description of the video if you guys want to go follow me over there. I'll post stuff there before I post it on YouTube. Okay, and now for the third and second to last glue up. So cut your veneers, rearrange your pieces, and then rotate all your pieces 90 degrees and then glue them all back together with veneers in between them. Always make sure that you bag up your roller after the glue up or it'll be all crusty the next day and you won't be able to use it again. Okay, the following day, plane your boards, and they should be looking like this right about now.
What are you doing? Are you woodworking? Are you woodworking too?
Alright, you guys can skip this part right here. I'm just cutting 2 slices out of the board before I continue on so I can make a wedding gift for a family friend. And here's the board I made on the right. Okay, back to the build. Now I have my table saw blade set to 70 degrees. Now I'm going to cut up all my panels into strips at this angle. And you can choose any angle you want. It's kind of arbitrary. The more angle you have, the harder the glue up's going to be. I'll put a link in the description to this angle gauge. Next, I'm measuring the thickness of my panel. This one is 5/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to go to my table saw blade and I'm going to set my fence 5/8 of an inch away from the blade, and that's the thickness I'm going to cut all the strips to. Okay, so now all your angled strips are gonna have a sharp edge on them. So I cut this piece at the table saw with a square edge. It's the same thickness as the other pieces, and I use that as a guide rather than risking damaging one of my pieces with the razor blade. I was having a problem with the veneer splitting at the end, so as you'll see right here, I make a little cut at the end before I finish the cut, and then I finish the rest of the cut. That helps prevent them from splitting. Okay, this glue up is different than the other glue ups because now all the pieces are angled, so when you apply a lateral force with the clamps, they're going to want to ride on top of each other. And the way we're going to combat this is I'm going to use clamping cauls, which I'm putting on right here. These are metal cauls. You can use wood or you can use angle iron. Right here I put 2 clamps on the outside. If you put your cauls on the outside of the other clamps, then you can put more clamps in the middle of the cauls, which is what I'm going to be doing from now on. Okay, so I made a little mistake right here on the end. So I'm just going to cut this off, and to make up for the width in my cutting board, I'm just going to add a border. So I let the glue set up overnight, and then the next day I just run it through the planer. And right here I'm cutting the pieces for the main body of the cutting board that I'm going to build with the pattern. I'm using a Freud glue line blade for these cuts. I have one for cross cut and one for rip cuts. They're really good blades, and they make it to where you don't have to joint the pieces, and it's a really clean glue line when you glue up your board. I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to pick one up. Right here I'm light sanding all my pattern pieces, that way I get a really clean glue up. And on these boards, I'm gluing up the pattern separately than the main body of the board, just to prevent any slippage that'll misalign the pattern. And I always make sure to have a damp rag handy, that way I can wipe up the glue squeeze out and I can make sure that my pattern is perfectly aligned. So the pattern looks pretty good right here, but I end up adding a 3-piece border to the board, and after running it through the planer 3 more times, the pattern just each time it just misaligns and gets worse and worse. So I don't recommend adding a 3-piece border to your board if you're going to make this pattern. So I'm not claiming that this is the best or only way to make these patterns, but this is the way that I'm doing it right now. If you guys come up with better ways to do it, then I would love to hear about it, so leave me a comment down below. Okay, right here I'm gluing the main body of the board to the pattern, and I'm also gluing on some sacrificial rails on the ends of the board. That way I can run it through my planer. My planer has a helical head, so I think that's perfectly fine. I've ran probably like 50 boards through my planer and I've never had any issues, so I'm not too worried about it. When I glued up the first pattern, the clamps kept tipping over, so right here I'm stacking them on top of each other. That way when I glue up this pattern, they don't tip over. In my next video, I'll be doing a tutorial on these tufted edges, so if you want to know when that video comes out, subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment below. I hope you guys got some value from this video, and thank you guys for watching, and now it's time for the final shots.